engineering, and me and Frank are part of the team that's working on our strategy to migrate our company from Skype for Business to Teams.
So today we're going to talk with you about our overall strategy for delivering great business impact through collaboration. We'll then look at the capabilities of teams and how that helps enable people to openly and efficiently work together. And then we'll spend most of our time talking about the kinds of questions that we considered as we planned how to make teams work within our existing environment.
Yes.
So I just wanted to remind you and let you know that you can ask questions in the Q&A window as we go along. And we expect to have more time, have some questions as we go, and then we expect we'll have some time at the end for additional questions.
Yep. Only if those are simple, or do we answer
we know
everything?
If we know the answers, we'll address your questions.
All right.
Okay. So we wanted to talk initially a little bit about sort of the spirit of change. Now, I do some training sessions here within the company, trying to help all of us get ready for Microsoft Teams. And one of the things that I emphasize right up front is as much as we can talk about the technology, how to use Teams and make sure everything works well and together, if we don't look at our own behaviors of how we work with one another, how we collaborate, then it doesn't make such difference. You know, we're up to making an impact for our customers in the world, and to do so we really have to engage at that level of how we behave.
Yes, the change or the culture should start with us as individuals and our teams. And a good example that I like to give generally, and it's something that I have found very useful, is I was part of the Skype for Business support team, and a part of my role as a support engineer was to analyze logs and look for problems. And in that role specifically, when you are troubleshooting a problem, you often come across scenarios where you look at something in the log and you're like, is this supposed to be that way? If there was only someone who I can go and ask that, hey, you know what, I see this in the log. I do not know if this is a problem. Could you tell me if this is expected or if this is something by design? And the right person, obviously, for me to ask that question would be someone who is either a developer who wrote that code, or a program manager who owns that particular product or work stream. And given the fact that we have about 500 support engineers in Microsoft, and each one of them, if tried to reach out to a developer or a program manager to ask that question, that model would never scale. And it would randomize everyone. So what I've seen happening now with Teams is the engineering team has actually a team in Teams where they have multiple channels, each channel for every work stream, like sign in, meeting joins, federation. So if I, as an engineer, am looking to find answers on, hey, how does federation work? Then all I have to do is go to that team, go to that channel, and I can ask a question, right? I don't have to find out who should I ask the question to. I just post it there, and someone who has the bandwidth may respond. Better yet, I can actually go to the file section in that team and look and see what files are uploaded. Many a times the feature spec of the product is actually in there. So now, just by opening up that information to everyone, you have helped someone who you may not even know that you're helping. So that's something that I really like.
Great, that really, that speaks to something that we need to consider as we answer the question that I often get faced with in some of these tracings is, what should I use? How should I get started? What's the right way for me to collaborate and work with my colleagues? And I think it's really important that we consider the culture. Like, well, how are people already working? What is their tendency? We need to think about the scale of the effort. For example, if we are working across a couple of people on a problem, maybe it's a small scale and a short period of time. Okay. We want something that's really easy and quick to get going. Whereas if we're looking at a 6-month endeavor and we really need to be closely coordinated, then we would make other choices for how to get everyone aligned and have authoritative information. Yeah. So.
And so one of the questions that normally we seem to get, and I hear that a lot, is we have so many tools. Which one should I use and why? So
Well, fortunately, we know we now with Office 365, we have groups, and what a group does is it provides a way to include all of our colleagues, everyone that we're working with, in this group, and then they get access to the various capabilities that are available with Office 365. So whether it's Outlook for emails and calendaring, so we know when we're connecting, whether it's Sharepoint to store our files and information, or if we're thinking about what kind of conversation we have. We might be working in teams where we need a very iterative conversation. All of that comes back and is based on this Office 365 group, which makes the management of that experience very easy. And I already know, and I always know, who is included in the collaboration because everyone who's a member of the team has all of these capabilities available.
So what I'm getting is we have all these tools available, and as a user, you have the choice and freedom to use what you like, but the technology with groups and teams is trying to make it easier so you can try to get things in one place.
Absolutely. And in fact, it's not always a case that you need to use everything right now. There might be an opportunity when we need later on to use a more advanced SharePoint solution to get our story out and broadcast it, really get to a broad audience. And this helps me flex with what's needed at a particular time in the process.
That's great.
Yeah. So we've been talking a little bit about the culture and what we aspire to at Microsoft, a little bit about how collaboration works, and now we got to think with Microsoft Teams, how does that support these efforts? And one of the things that I really appreciate is it keeps everyone in the know. Like in your example of being a part of that team allowed people to find the information they needed.
Yes.
I love that I've got a single workspace that allows me to get access to what I need to do at any given point in time. I can always go there. And when I am working in multiple teams, then I can have almost like a different flavor or a different style, and Teams accommodates different kinds of capabilities in each team and each channel that allow it to really be adaptable to the kind of work that people are doing.
Right, and I've seen that too. Different teams work differently. Some teams use their channels a lot to collaborate and talk and discuss what they want. Some I have seen use it primarily to share files and documents because they think that it's a very good way to keep things in one place and they don't have to look for them every time they need information. So it's adaptable. You use the teams the way you like it, right? That's a good point.
Yeah. So as we move forward, we want to talk a little bit about the core capabilities, right? Our goal is to have everyone use Teams for calling, for chat and messaging, and meetings, as well as our federation, our interaction with our customers and partners.
Yes.
Our goal essentially is that everyone can do in Teams what they can do today in Skype for Business.
Yes, and that's the primary question that we have to answer when we talk about migrating or moving to Teams, right? We have to do it only when Teams can be used by our users to do everything that they do today with Skype for Business, right? And then when we talk about migration, the first step in our migration journey, ideally, is that we should be thinking about moving our users to online, right? And this is a journey that we started a long time ago. And today, most of our users are actually in Skype for Business online. Now, when we talk about migrating to Teams, the next step for us as a company is to look at PSTN calling. PSTN calling is a criteria that would determine your strategy, whether you can use Teams completely or not. And as you said, we want our users to use Teams for everything. We want them to at least have the opportunity to do it for everything. And when we talk about everything, PSTN calling is a factor in it.
Right.
Today in our company, Skype for Business is our primary solution for PSTN calling. We have users that are homed in Skype for Business Online. They use Cloud PBX with PSTN calling. We have users that are homed in Skype for Business Online, but they use Hybrid Voice, which is the OPCH solution for PSTN calling.
Okay.
And we also have users who are homed in Skype for Business On-Prem, and that is what they use for PSTN calling. So between the three of us, between the three solutions
Right.
that we just highlighted, 100% of our Microsoft users are able to use Skype for Business for PSTN calling.
Okay, so we've got people handled with PSTN calling in Skype for Business. Now what about Teams?
Yes, and that's the criteria. That's an important question, because if we want to talk about migrating to Teams, the first question that we have to answer is, Skype for Business allows us PSTN calling for everyone. What would happen if we move our users to Teams? Will they be able to get PSTN calling? And to answer that question, we have to look at what are the options for PSTN calling in Teams today. And today, broadly, we have two sets of options. The option one is you could actually move your telephone numbers, you port your telephone numbers to Office 365, or you can purchase telephone numbers from Office 365, and then you can buy calling plans for your user who use Teams. That way, they would get PSTN calling ability in Teams. However, this option of using Office 365 for PSTN calling is only available in about 12 countries today. And we are present in countries and regions where this option is not available. So the other option that we have to use Teams for calling is direct routing. Now, direct routing allows you to keep your existing telephone numbers. You can keep your telephone lines as well. And then you assign these telephone numbers to your users who are using Teams. And the way it works is when someone calls this telephone number, the call actually goes to your on-premise telephone lines. And then we install, as a customer, you would install a session border controller, which would be a device that is configured such that any time a telephone number is called, this SBC is configured to send that call directly to Office 365 Microsoft Teams infrastructure. And then the team service will deliver the call to your users in Teams. So this allows you to keep your existing contracts, existing numbers, existing phone lines, and still use Teams for PSTN calling.
Okay, I'm just going to stop you right there, 'cause I see a question has come in here. Now, if people are not using these calling plans already, are they going to have to buy new equipment?
If users are not using calling plans, it tells me that you are not wanting to use PSTN calling with Teams. And if that's the case, and if you do not want to use PSTN calling with Teams, then it's even easier. Then you don't have to plan for it. The transition for you would be simpler. You don't have to buy any equipment. You don't have to buy any PSTN calling related licenses. You can just use Teams for the chat, meetings, and the collaboration aspect of it. So no, you don't have to buy any equipment.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. All right, so we've looked across these three capabilities, and we've got most people are handled.
And the way we have things configured today is Teams and Skype for Business. So we are talking about migrating to Teams. We know that the solution we have for PSTN calling would only cover portion of our users. So with the 90% of our users being covered with direct routing and calling plans and Teams, we will still be left with a portion of our users who may not be able to use these solutions because they happen to be in country and regions where none of these solutions are available. So we have Skype for Business on one hand, where everyone could actually use it for PSTN calling, and then we have Teams where 90% of our company users will be able to use it for PSTN calling specifically, but there would be a smaller group of users who would not be able to. And our solution is, the envisioned solution is to have 90% of our employee base use Teams where they can, and the remaining users would use Skype for Business.
So we've got 90% of our employees using Teams, and then 10% using Skype for Business and Teams.
Right.
Why don't we just have everyone use both Skype for Business and Teams?
Yes, and that's a good question. So what the way we are envisioning this is when we say 90% of our users will use Teams, it actually means Teams is the only client they will have. They won't be able to use Skype for Business for chat, calling, meetings. They will only be able to use it for joining. They will only be able to use Skype for Business to join Skype for Business meetings. Whereas the remaining 10% of our users will have both Teams and Skype for Business. Now, this is referred to as side-by-side or an island scenario. it's actually a very good way to introduce everyone to Teams. So if you're a company thinking about Teams, it's a good way to allow your users to use both Skype as well as Teams, and that gives them the ability to actually use Teams and get familiar with it. Now, once your users start using Teams and Skype for Business, they get familiar, and then the adoption increases. What we've seen is a lot of users in our company are starting to use it, and the more you use both products at the same time, at an extended period of time, after some point, you start having problems where there's user confusion. And what ideally happens, and what's starting to happen, is I could be a user who uses Teams a lot, and if I try to reach out to you in Teams, then the design of the scenario where you have two clients is that if I use Teams and I send you a message from Teams, you would always receive it in Teams. Okay. If I send you a message from Skype, you would always receive it in Skype, which means when I try to send you an IM on Teams, and if you're not logged into Teams, you wouldn't see my IM. And if I try to do that and I don't get a response from you, now I am forced to go back to Skype for Business. And then when I send you a message in Skype for Business, I get a response from you right away. This means, as a user, the perception of the product from me is changing. I start thinking that when I try to use Teams, I never get a response from Frank, although that might be intentional. Well, when I use Skype, I seem to hear back from you right away. So why should I even use it? And the more we start seeing adoption, the more we are starting to see this problem.
Okay, so I can see why having people in this islands mode where they have choice is creating a problem. So what can we do to remedy that? What approaches?
Yes, so in order for a company like us, or for a customer who is thinking about it, what we envision is that same aspect where instead of allowing users this choice where they can decide what client to use, what we can do is create the environment such that they don't have to make this choice. I shouldn't be someone who has to guess that, okay, if I want to talk to Frank on Monday, I should use Teams because Frank prefers to use Teams on Mondays. If I want to talk to Frank on, say, Tuesday, I should use Skype for Business because I, as a user, should not have to guess what client should I use in order to get a response from the person who I am trying to talk to. And this can only be solved if we have a scenario where either everyone uses one client or everyone uses both clients and are always logged in. Right. The latter is a little difficult to achieve because you can't always predict what client a user would use. So the options that we have is we're thinking that since Teams is capable of delivering everything that Skype for Business does for us today, it might be best if we actually transition our users over to Teams. And we know that per our calling strategy, 90% of our users can actually use Teams. And only the remaining 10% would have to rely on Skype for Business and Teams. So what happens is these 90% of our users would have only Teams available. And the solution to avoid the confusion is what we call client modes.
Okay.
A mode effectively is what dictates where you as a user would get your calls and get your chats. If you're a user and if you have been given a certain client mode, let's say that mode is you want to use Teams for everything. That means no matter who I am, if I try to send you a message, you would always get it in Teams. And the options that a user or a customer has is you have the islands mode, which is what we just talked about, where you don't force anyone to use anything. You have users using both. You then also have the ability to use what we call Teams mode, is what we are planning to use for about 90% of our company, in which your user would only have Teams as their preferred client. That means if you are a Teams mode user and I try to send you a message, it doesn't matter what client I am using, you always get it in Teams.
Oh, so the mode really only applies to the user for which that mode is applied. Yes. That's where that experience manifests.
Yes, the mode dictates your preference as a user, where you receive your IMs. It still does not dictate where the IM would land when you send it out. It dictates that would depend on what mode the other person
Right.
is configured in, which is why it's important as a company to ensure all your users have a certain mode setting applied to them and from the available choices. And the available choices are, as we discussed, we have the Islands mode, where both clients are available. We have the Teams mode, where Teams is your preferred client. You get everything in Teams. We also have the Skype for Business mode, where Skype for Business is your primary client. No matter who sends you an IM, whether they use Teams or Skype, you would always get it in Skype. We also have Group Collab and Group Collab with Meetings, where you have Skype as your primary client still, but you would be able to use the channel communication aspect of Teams as well.
Okay, got it. Well, there's a couple questions here I just wanted to pull in here. And what if users really aren't leveraging Teams at all? What's the approach there? I think we've got pockets within our company where people are perfectly happy working the way they're used to working.
Right. So if you have a situation like, and we probably have that too, we have a large portion of our users who use Teams and a small group of users who may not want to use Teams. And as a company, the option that you could have is you could use the Teams only setting for users who like and want to use Teams, whereas the other group of users, you could actually use Skype for Business only setting for them. What this basically does is it eliminates that confusion, right? If you have a set of users who have the Skype for Business only mode, that means Teams users can now reach these users even though they are using Teams and these users are using Skype. If you were in both places, then that's not possible. So yes, there's an option for those customers as well.
Got it. Let's see, I'm just scanning the questions that have come in here. Can you use Teams today for the remote control of a user's computer the way you can in Skype for Business? I think we have that in our, some of our help desk scenarios, right?
True, right. So there are two options there. In Skype for Business, you had the ability to share your screen when you were in a peer-to-peer chat and then allow someone to control your screen. In Teams, we don't have the ability to do screen sharing and screen control in a peer-to-peer chat. However, those functions light up if you are in a one-on-one call. So if you are in a Teams call or if you are in a Teams meeting, you have the ability to share your screen and then the other person could actually take control. So,
okay, so it's possible today then?
It is possible,
right.
yes.
Great. Okay, now we've been looking at these modes, and I have a sense, at least conceptually, for kind of how they work. But what's the experience? What's it going to feel like for users who are in these modes?
True, and the experience is, ideally for a user, the experience should not change dramatically. And we have some screenshots now that we will go through that will show what your client would look like if you are in a certain mode.
Okay.
Right? And we'll start with the Islands mode, and we talked about this is very self-explanatory. And Islands mode is basically where a user has both Teams as well as Skype for Business. All functions are available in Teams, all functions are available in Skype for Business.
Yeah.
We then move over to Skype for Business only mode. This is where you as a user have Skype for Business as your primary client. Anyone who tries to reach out to you, no matter what client they use, you always get it in Skype for Business. In this case, there are two ways to put users in this mode. One is you don't give your users a Teams license at all. That way, if they try to sign into Teams, they would get a screen saying that you are missing out, you don't have Teams.
Right.
Or you could actually give your users a Teams license, still keep them in Skype for Business mode, and in that case, when they sign into Teams, they will only be able to use Teams to join Teams meetings. They will only be able to use it to chat within the meeting. They won't be able to create one-on-one chats in Teams. They won't be able to make calls in Teams, nor will they be able to schedule meetings in Teams.
Okay.
Then we have the Teams only mode. This is what we think 90% of our employee base would eventually use.
Right.
And in this mode, Teams is your primary client for everything, whereas Skype for Business is running in this reduced mode, and it's only available to join Skype for Business meetings.
And I think this has been popular from users that I've talked to because you've got then, you can expect to use Teams, and you don't feel like you have to do this back and forth. It solves that problem that we have today as we've tried, both clients out, let people get used to them, but then there's this confusion. So Teams only mode simplifies that.
And it does simplify that. Anytime we can take the guesswork away from the users, where they don't have to decide which client should I be using to talk to someone, that's effective, right? And
all right.
Then we have a group of users, or we could have a group of customers that like Skype for Business, want to use that today primarily for chat and calling, etc., because they need time for their users to get familiar with Teams. But they don't want the users to lose out on the Teams functionality, the aspect which is creating channels, collaborating in Teams. They may want to use Teams only for that for now, and then later they may want to start using chat and calling and meetings and other features in Teams. And for such customers, Skype for Business with Group Collab is a nice setting or a nice mode to have, because what this allows you to do is your users will continue to use Skype for Business for chat, calling, and meetings, and they can also use Teams, and they can sign into Teams and still use the Teams aspect of it. And you can see that on the screenshot here. If you are a user who's in Skype for Business with Teams Collab Mode, when you sign into Teams, you can use Teams for Teams communication, to channel communication. You won't be able to use it to create any meetings. You can still join Teams meetings, and you can conduct chats within the meeting.
Okay. So chat, even though I see chat there, I'm limited with how I can use it?
Yes, and the way chat in Teams works is when you have a meeting, and if you are having a IM session with the participants in the meeting, that shows up in the chat tab as well. So when you are using Teams only to join meetings, you may still want to have instant messages between the participants of that meeting, and this is what the chat tabs allow you to do when you are in this mode.
Got it. Now, a couple of questions I want to stop here for a sec. For people who have hardware specifically that they're using for PSTN calling, how is that going to work when shifting that capability to Teams? Are they still going to be able to use those phones?
Okay, that's an important question. So when we talk about hardware, I am assuming that we're talking about desk phones and devices that are. So today, Skype, if your existing hardware is the hardware that is being used with Skype for Business, then there are certain devices that may not directly have the Teams client on it, right? And I'm primarily referring to the Polycom VVX series phones. But if you are a user who wants to use Teams, and if you want that phone, we do have a way to make that phone work with Teams. And the way the engineering team has designed that approach is your phone still logs in as if it's logged into the Skype for Business client. Okay. But in the background, when a call is initiated from the phone, this call goes to what we call an interop gateway, a media gateway on our side, which intercepts the call and then converts that from being a SIP call to the REST APIs that Teams actually works on, and it then sends the call over using the Teams infrastructure.
I think that's what is going on for me. I have one of these older VVX phones. It doesn't look any different than it always have. I'm testing out the Teams only capability, and that it still rings, like it's still operated, and it connects with.
That's great. That's great to know. And this is just for legacy devices. We do have vendors today that are actually manufacturing devices that can run a fully functional Teams client on them, which is based on Android applications. So we do have some of those devices that we're testing with, and in future we should expect more such devices.
Related to these modes, a question came in. Is the mode setting that we need to do for all users from the tenant, or is it in the admin console?
A mode setting, I'm assuming that the question is that should we apply the mode setting for everyone, or could we apply it to sets of users?
Yeah, like the tenant setting versus more specific controls.
It is always user-based. It shouldn't be tenant-based, because you may want to apply a mode to your user based on what your user may want, right? So if you have, for example, 10 users in the company that say that we only want to use Teams and we want all our communications to come to Teams, you would put those 10 users and only those 10 users in the Teams mode, whereas the rest of your company could be in a mode which they prefer. So it's always a user-based setting.
Okay. And there's another question. I may need your help to kind of figure it out. This is around the collaboration mode and working with external clients. Would Teams inside and Skype external for clients?
Okay.
Your Teams, yes.
So the question is, will the collaboration mode work with external clients? Teams inside and Skype external for clients.
Yeah.
Now,
So I think we'll have that situation where we're in Teams only mode, and yet people we may partner with, either because we've invited them to a meeting, maybe one case. A different case might be we've invited them as a guest to collaborate within our environment. So if we're in collab mode,
yes. So if we're only talking about collab mode, the premise of collab mode is you can use Teams for only channel communication. So you can create Teams, and you can create channels, and then you can collaborate within channels. So yes, you should be able to add a guest to your channel, and then collaborate with them. Yes. However, you would not be able to use chat and meetings and calling. So you won't be able to search the external clients or customers, as you may say, from Teams and have a one-on-one chat with them.
Okay.
So that will be disabled because that comes part of the actual Teams client. And if you allow that in Teams and also in Skype, then we have that confusion again as to which client should the users use. So.
Okay. So when inviting someone in, they're going to get the kind of experience that based on the team they're invited into?
Yes,
okay.
That is how it should be.
Okay. Let's see. Where do you set that mode? How does that
so
work?
setting mode is a user level policy which can be done using PowerShell. What I do not know is if the Skype and Teams Administration Center that is now available in preview and to customers allows that or not. It may in future, but right now the way we are doing it, we are running a PowerShell policy. We are running a PowerShell command to a user specifically saying that Frank is in Teams mode. Anas is in Skype for Business mode, and it's pretty straightforward, and there are documentation available on how you do it.
Okay, and as you say, we're kind of early in the road. There might be additional capabilities coming as we get closer to releasing this broadly.
Yes.
Great. Let's see.
How do you activate Teams mode, and if you are able to show that now? What we can
they don't give me permissions to mess with those settings, so I can't help.
And I've asked for those a lot as well, and somehow I don't get them too. So, but I can walk you through through what is actually needed to set Teams mode. So there is a Teams upgrade policy for every user. What you could do is once you log into your Office 365 PowerShell for Skype for Business Online, you could run a command that says get-cs online user, and this will show you the Teams upgrade policy setting of that user. You have to change that upgrade policy to upgrade to Teams. When you change the upgrade policy to upgrade to Teams, then you have to actually today set the interop policy saying Teams is your preferred client, and the interop policy that you use is called disallow override calling Teams chat Teams. When you set these two, what effectively happens in the background is your Teams client becomes your primary client, and all chats messages are directed to Teams. At the same time, when you sign into Skype for Business, these policies are sent to the client in the in-band settings, and the moment the client finds out that, hey, this user is upgraded to Teams, your Skype for Business client will become non-functional. Non-functional as in you would see a white screen showing you can't use Skype for Business anymore. You have to move everything over to Teams.
Okay. Okay. And what's the default mode?
The default mode for everyone is always islands, meaning Teams and Skype for Business would operate independently of each other, and if you haven't set any mode or anything in particular, conversations that start in Teams would stay in Teams. Conversations that start in Skype for Business would stay in Skype for Business.
And
They don't talk to each other.
Yeah, and that's how we started, right?
That
we
is
put
exactly
both in
how
the
we started,
environment,
yes.
and Islands mode allows us to
Yep,
get started.
and we talked about it. It's a good way for a company to start adopting Teams. However, if you do that for an extended period of time, you may start running into user confusion where users have to guess what client should I use today to talk to someone, right?
And I know there's some resources, there's some documentation on these Teams modes, and we actually have that listed in the resources at
Yes.
the end. And so that will be available because I don't quite have it all straight, but working on it. Thanks.
Right.
Let's shift the conversation just a bit. And I know a lot of my work has been helping people to be ready for the change to Microsoft Teams. But that's not something we've been able to do overnight. Like we'd love to be able to say, okay, hey everyone, Teams magically avoid all these complicated scenarios. However, that's a lot of change for both our users, people who are in different roles and have different requirements, and of course that we anticipate our need to support those users or any questions. We, as a company of almost 200,000 people, need to do that over time. Can you explain a little bit about what our strategy has been for that?
Yes. So as we talked, we adopted Teams much earlier than the rest of the world because we made it available to our users as soon as it was ready. And because of that, we always had Skype for Business, and we still have Skype for Business. The entire population of our users was using Skype for Business, and then suddenly we had this small group of users who started using Teams. And what we've seen organically is this small group of users who were using Teams is increasing. So we are seeing a slight dip in the adoption of Skype for Business. However, we're seeing a corresponding increase in Teams as well. So it will be organic for customers out there as well. It probably will. However, what we feel that would have been great is not delay this phase where users run both clients for an extended period of time. And we do have options now to prevent that. Initially, when Teams was launched, we'd never had the option to use a Teams mode or a Skype for Business mode, or we didn't have the ability to make it easier for a user to not have the guesswork involved. But now we do. So our transition plan is we are waiting for Teams to make sure all the feature gaps are closed. We want to ensure that Teams as a product can deliver everything that our users want and they are getting today with Skype for Business. The day that happens, we have a strategy lined up to actually start migrating our users to Teams, because once Teams can do everything that Skype for Business can do for you, effectively, it does not make sense to run two clients and then have users rely on both to do some work here and some here. And once we see those feature gaps close, we would start transitioning of our users. And that's what we were talking about. We know that 90% of our users can actually go to Teams and use everything because calling is available to them. But the rest of the users will keep using Skype for Business and Teams. And our guidance to them is use Teams for chat and everything else. Only try to use Skype for Business when you want to make a PSTN call.
So I know you mentioned, when we have all those capabilities that are ready, and I saw a question come in around the whiteboard functionality. Is that something that we're waiting for, and is that coming?
Yes, so whiteboard is something that a lot of major incident teams in our companies use, and we have groups like Sharepoint, Exchange, and anytime there's a Surface outage, then the engineers and the engineering community join this bridge and they would talk about what they're doing on a whiteboard. So yes, it's an important feature for us. We are waiting for it as well, and we feel that there are certain groups of our users who rely on that more than others. So we may be able to find a balance where we don't upgrade them until it's coming. The solution that is available today for whiteboard is we have third-party apps that you can integrate with Teams and use the whiteboard services that they offer. However, being able to provide native whiteboard in Teams is there on our product roadmap, and we're pretty confident that we will deliver it, if not right away, then at some point.
Okay, got it. Let's shift again a little bit, because I know one of the things that is important within our environment is meetings, right? We have a lot of meetings.
Don't touch someone's meetings.
Right. So how do we get ready to make sure that that's going to be a great experience for people who are beginning to use Teams?
Yes, and this is something that we are always in two minds, and I'll talk about why. Firstly, meetings is very simple. If you want to transition to Teams, meetings is something that we feel as an organization is not something that you really have to plan for, because by design, Skype for Business and Teams are two separate products. If you have a Skype for Business meeting, you can only join that meeting using either the Skype for Business client or the Skype for Business web app. If you have a Teams meeting, you can only join that meeting using the Teams client or the Teams web client. There is never interaction between the two, which makes things easier, because if we were to move our users to Teams, so let's say you,
right.
If we put you in Teams mode, you can only create Teams meeting. And that means you will create Teams meeting and you can send it to whoever you want, whether it's your customer, whether it's your colleagues, and all they have to do is click on the meeting link and join using either, if they have the Teams client, they can join using the Teams client. If they don't have the Teams client, they can still join using the web app.
So I actually don't have to know what state my customer or partner is in when I'm setting up meetings with them.
Exactly.
I thought I had to.
No, that's
Okay.
the great part about meeting. When it comes to chat, there is always that confusion that, okay, I am going to send someone a message from Teams, but I don't know if they will be using Teams and if they'll get it or not, right?
Yeah.
Which is why you have to configure modes so that you make sure that everyone gets the message where they prefer. With meetings, that guesswork is never there, because when you click on a Teams meeting link, by design, it's always your Teams client that will launch or the Teams web app that will launch. And if you are a customer who does not even know what Teams is, and if you still send them a Teams meeting link, they should still be able to click and join that meeting, even though they've never used Teams before, even though they don't know what Teams is, using the web app.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, the other question, and I think this is what customers may have to prepare for, is meeting room hardware.
Right.
Now, in Microsoft, we have thousands of conference rooms, and each of these conference rooms today support one-touch join for Skype for Business meetings. So the experience is very simple, right? I, as a user, can create a Skype for Business meeting. I can invite a conference room to my meeting. I can walk up to the conference room. I would see my meeting there on the device. I click join, and now I am in the meeting. It's the perfect experience. And we want to make sure we don't break that if we move someone to Teams. So the way it works today with Skype for Business is this device where you are joining the meeting, it has a user who's signed in as a Skype for Business user. So this device is running a perfectly functional Skype for Business client. That is what allows you to actually invite the room to your meeting. You're actually inviting this user to your meeting. You just don't know. And that allows you to actually go and walk up and click the join button, and this user who now has this giant screen joins your meeting. So we have conference rooms today that have link room systems, Skype room systems, Surface Hubs, Skype room system version 2, which is Rigel, Polycom Trios, and all these support the one-touch join feature with Skype for Business. What we are working with the engineering team is to ensure that these devices that run the Skype for Business client today can also run the Teams client, so that when I create a Teams meeting and invite these conference room, I should be able to go and then click the join button and join the Teams meeting.
So it won't matter which client I've used to create that meeting, the conference room is going to work. Now, what about conference rooms that don't run those Microsoft systems? I know we've got some in our environment. How is that going to work?
Yes, and the story is perfect for conference rooms that have Microsoft supported systems like SRS, Rigel, and Surface Hubs. However, if you are a customer, and we have organizations in our company that don't necessarily have Microsoft supported hardware for their conference room. LinkedIn is primary example
right,
of that,
yes.
right? Because we acquired them and they already were a vendor shop. So what we're doing and what customers in similar situations have the ability to do is if they already have a conferencing system in their conference room, I'm going to take an example and say it's provided by Polycom, right? What they could do is work with the third-party vendors, and we have Prexip, BlueJeans, and Polycom. What these vendors are doing are they are coming up with these interop devices which sit between the Teams infrastructure and the conference room hardware. And what they do is they allow your conference room hardware to be compatible with Teams so that you can actually invite a conference room which is not a Microsoft proprietary client,
Right.
into a Teams meeting.
Oh, so if these partners do that work, then I don't have to do anything but make sure I'm working properly with the
Yes.
partner.
You may have to work with the partner to ensure that the hardware that you have in your room could actually be used using the solution that they are providing.
Got it. Okay, makes sense. All right, so we've talked about overall the collaboration environment, and then specifically we've gotten into our talk around calling, chat and messaging, and now meetings as well. We need all these capabilities working,
True.
so that we can use Teams independently.
Right, and what we were focusing on is how does a company like us plan their transition to Team, and to summarize it, we can say that step one would be to ensure that if you are using Skype for Business, you try to move your users online. Step two would be to find out what are your PSTN calling needs and see if the existing solutions that Teams has would actually cater to all your PSTN calling needs or not. Step three would be to then find out how do you want to roll out Teams. Do you want to take away Skype for Business for everyone at the same time and just give them Teams? That way there is no confusion. Or do we want to do a staged rollout where you would let your users explore both Skype as well as Teams for some amount of time and later decide how do you want to actually go forward? Do you want to cut over part of your users to Teams and let the remaining stay on Skype for Business for longer? Or do you want to go a bit aggressive and start rolling over to Teams sooner? We feel it is better to have one client to minimize the confusion. So once you feel confident enough that you've given users enough time to adopt, learn, and train, then you should be
In my
able
class?
to.
Yeah.
Yes. You were waiting to say that, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a good time to start moving. And yes, you have to wait to make sure that Teams is capable of doing everything that you would expect it to do, because you were doing that in Skype for Business.
Right. And then, at that time, we have a substantial effort to make sure that we've informed users about what's going to change. We give them information that makes them aware and understand the change in the capabilities that they'll have with Microsoft Teams. And then make sure that we set their expectations about when that change is going to occur.
True. And we focused most of our conversation on the high level things, which is primarily calling and chat and messaging and meetings. However, as an organization or as a company, there may be several other factors that you may also have to consider when you plan your migration to Teams, like we do. You may be a company that relies heavily on RGS. So if you want to migrate over to Teams, you want to make sure that Call Queues, which is the online solution similar to RGS, does everything that RGS is doing for you. And if not, then you may have to find an acceptable workaround. Devices was a great question that we got during our session. We need to make sure that if you have your users that use phones at their desk, they are compatible. There are other smaller things. Federation is pretty important for a lot of customers out there, including us. So we have to make sure that Federation is working in its full capacity before we think about migration as well. So you may have instances. Common area phones is another thing that comes to mind. So you may have to prepare and plan for these things on top of the high-level bucket items like calling and chat and meetings.
I got it. Okay. Lots to think about for
Yes.
sure. Well, we've reached the end of our presentation, and before we get into more of our question and answer, I want to remind you that you can type your questions in the Q&A window. We'll do our best to get through as many questions as we can, and we have quite a few already queued up here.
Okay.
So with that, we'll dive in. Actually, wait. Before, just make sure I get time. Let's show the resources slide. I want to make sure people have access to this as well. So this shows some additional content about some of the work that we've done to make Teams available, and then there's some specific information about the country and regions where which the calling plans are available, and the detailed guidance around modes. You talked about it here. I know people would be interested in being able to reference that for deeper information and further reference. So these resources are available to you in your window. Let's go ahead and start.
Let's go ahead and start looking at the questions. Let's pick the ones that we know answers for. All right.
There's one up here. Oh, we were talking about meetings, and do Skype meeting links have to be rescheduled when you are moving to Teams? I know that was a concern that we had.
Yes, yeah. So the question is, if you were to move to Teams, do you have to reschedule your Skype meetings, right? And this is a question that we debated a lot as well, because we have hundreds of recurring meetings. Now, the solution that we as a company are using, and may not necessarily be something that everyone is comfortable with, is when you move to Teams as a user, you give up your ability to create or schedule Skype for Business meetings.
Okay.
You do not give up your ability to join Skype for Business meetings. So even though you are a Teams user, and if you can only create Teams meeting going forward, any Skype for Business meetings that you previously created are still functional. You can still join them. If you've sent those meetings out to customers or users, they can still join them using Skype for Business. So what we feel is organically, what would happen is these Skype for Business meetings would phase out because you won't be able to create them anymore. So you can still keep your existing Skype for Business meetings, join them, but any new meetings you would be creating in Teams. If you like, you do have the ability to go ahead and cancel your Skype for Business meetings and book Teams meetings in their place. That's a user choice. But if you don't want to do all that work, you can keep your meetings.
And this is true for on-prem users as well?
This is true. So if you are on-prem users, then you would likely not have the ability to use if you were an on-prem user, your Skype for Business meetings will always be there because we don't have a way to actually remove your Skype for Business.
If I'm inviting an on-prem user to a Teams meeting,
if you are a Teams user, and if you send the Teams meeting invite to a user who is an on-prem user. So the good thing about a Teams meeting is, as a user, you never have to care about who you are inviting. Right? You send the meeting link to the person, and if that user is a Teams user, they would join your meeting using the Teams client. If they are not a Teams user, if they are using Skype for Business on-prem and on-prem only, they would join your Teams meeting using the Teams web app. So your participant of your meeting, what environment they use, should ideally not play a factor in whether they can join or not join your meeting.
They'll always have that link.
Yes.
In addition, I know that when I've run Teams, I have a button that shows up in Outlook.
Yes.
And when I have that Teams button that shows up in Outlook, allowing me to create meetings, I also have the ability just to right-click even on a meeting and join that way.
Right.
So if I have that Teams mode, then it's even simpler for me to join meetings.
True. Okay. You would have the button that allows you to join the meeting. You would also have a button in Outlook that allows you to create a Teams meeting when you're ready.
Now, for an organization that's just now moving to Office 365, would you recommend that they start with Teams only?
So if you're a company that has never used Skype for Business before, yes, it's best to try using Teams only mode, specifically if Teams is able to give you everything that you are looking for. So if you think that all the features that are available in Teams today are enough for you and you are not wanting anything else, then yes, it's better to start with Teams only. For customers who are already using Skype for Business, it's a little difficult because now you get into a scenario where you compare. I used to be able to do this with Skype for Business, now I cannot do this with Teams. So then you have to wait. You have to make sure Teams can deliver everything for you, and then it's only training that's needed to make sure users are familiar on how to do it.
Well, at what point, though, is Skype for Business not going to be available? And when do people have to move to Teams?
That's a question that I do not think I can answer because I honestly do not know. However, the idea is any customer who is currently eligible to move to Teams, our recommendation is try to move if you feel comfortable as soon as you can. However, whether Skype for Business would be available for how long is a question that I do not have the answer for. There is no way that we would be able to turn off Skype for Business until we have feature parity with Teams, because we cannot tell our customers that, sorry, we just don't want you using our product anymore. So we will make sure Teams can have feature parity with Skype and give users enough time and option to make the switch before something is drastically changed.
So I know there's a question about what would prevent someone from moving to Microsoft Teams, and while we don't know the specifics of any specific organization, what are one or two of the items that have been things that we're particularly dependent on?
Yeah, I can talk about us as a company. We are heavily dependent on federation. We want to make sure that a user who does not have Skype for Business and only has Teams should be able to chat and call any federated customer, whether they are Skype for Business online, whether they are Skype for Business on-prem, or whether they are Teams. That's something that we cannot afford to break. That may be a blocker for a lot of customers out there, and the story is pretty good. We know that federation is already working in a number of scenarios today when we're testing that already. But that's one of the bigger concerns. PSTN calling would be another thing to investigate, because if you are a global company and if you want to use Teams as your only solution, you may want to make sure that you can use PSTN calling in every location that you exist in. So that may be something else that you have to consider. Those are two very important things for us.
Okay. And then when we're in Teams only mode, the Outlook plugin, is that available in that mode?
If you are Teams only, so Outlook plugin normally does not depend on your Teams only mode. Outlook plugin would be available even if you are using Teams and Skype for Business side by side, because Outlook plugin allows you to create Teams meeting. You shouldn't be a user who can create a Teams meeting only if you are using Teams. You should be allowed to create Teams meeting if you are using both Skype and Teams, because you may be testing both just to see how they work, right? So it is available.
All right, sounds great. Let's see if there's another question we can get to. There's a little bit around using modern groups. So now, are the Sharepoint capabilities available when you're using Microsoft Teams? Is there a connection, a linkage between Sharepoint Team sites and Microsoft Teams?
I think this is an area that you're highly familiar with as well.
Yeah, I do know that when you create a Microsoft team, a new team, you are in essence creating a modern SharePoint site behind the scenes. It's part of that Office 365 group and the connection between those things. So yeah, you get a SharePoint site. You also have the ability to provision things in, for example, Power BI. Planner, right? There are a number of Office 365 and other capabilities that can be associated with that group. So they are one and the same. We do still have cases where we create, now it's just communication sites which offer broader capabilities. That would be a distinct case for us. Yeah, for any team, you're getting
a SharePoint site. You
yeah.
just don't know it's happening in the background.
You may not, right? You can
Right.
find it. It's your files tab is essentially
True.
What's providing that capability. Okay, so I think we're just about out of time. I know there's some more questions. We'll do some work to see if we can answer those questions.
All right.
Do check back with our on-demand versions, because we'll try and record some additional answers.
So we're staying back and answering the questions still?
If we know the answers,
Okay.
we'll do our best,
All right.
right? But I want to thank you all for spending time with us today, and I hope the session has been valuable for you. Please be sure to visit Microsoft.com IT Showcase